feature presentation.
Let him come. Welcome back, everyone, to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohr. I forgot my name.
You're so caught up in delivering that
Yeah,
line
I
beautifully.
was.
I thought Peter
Optimus,
Cullen was in the room with us.
Optimus Matt, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved. Eric Marchin.
That's Eric Cheetor Marchin.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. The Beast Wars have begun, my friend. Are you a beastie or are you a I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. How are you doing?
It's Friday morning. I think I am a little bit of a beastie boy. I grew up
better. That's way better. That's way better.
Watching the show in the late 90s, and I think like
Same.
any kid in that age group that was obsessed with that show, collected as many of the action figures as possible. So I think actually, and I don't know if you feel the same, but I felt like I had more of an affinity for Beast Wars, or Beasties as it was known in Canada, than the original Transformers series, even
I would
though
agree.
the first movie, the 86 film, not the show, but the movie, I had seen before and I had really liked. And obviously Unicron's a big part of that movie, both literally and figuratively. So, you know, like
This movie takes a lot from that movie, kind of. But,
yeah, well, parts of it, because
yeah.
it's like one storyline that it doesn't, and everybody knows about it because it's very notorious, is that in the first 10 minutes of that movie, Optimus Prime dies, and so do the original lineup of the Transformers. And the reason for that was because Hasbro and the marketing team were making
new toys,
right?
Yeah.
So they're bringing in new characters, but because kids were so attached to Optimus and all of those other characters, when that happened, it became one of the most traumatic experiences for kids in the late 80s growing up with those toys, and that they had to bring them back into the new series. And it actually even affected the G.I. Joe movie, because in the G.I. Joe animated film, Duke dies, and they kind of edited the film to make it like, oh, he fell into a coma, and then at the very end,
kind of do that in the movies too, or something.
And then at the end of that film, they're like, he woke up, he's good, but you never see him on camera again.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I'm kind of with you, where I was a big Transformers kid, but Beast Wars, or Beasties in Canada, I think because that came out in the 90s, that was almost like my Transformers series, right? And then I knew Optimus and I knew the Maximals and stuff through that series, and I became obsessed with Transformers, I think, because of Beast Wars. So that being said, like, I can't say I was like, you know kind of what you're getting with the Transformers movie, right? Like, and first off, I want to say no spoilers in this review. I know last week when we made our comeback, we said, oh, all of our new reviews are going to drop on the day of a movie's release, and they'll have full spoilers. We're embargoed on spoilers until next week, so we cannot talk spoilers and specifics in this review, but we'll dance around stuff. And if you've seen the movie, you'll know what we're talking about. But yeah, so I was kind of moderately or tepidly excited for this one, because we had the Bay movies, and they were awful, but they were bombastic and huge and big. Then we had Bumblebee, which I actually liked quite a bit. I thought Haley Steinfeld was great in that movie. I liked the 80s time period in that movie. I just thought it had a lot of heart, and it actually was easily the best Transformers movie for me personally, and live action Transformers movie. So I was kind of looking forward to this, because I'm like, okay, my nostalgia for the Maximals and Beast Wars is here. It can't possibly, after Bumblebee, you're like, okay, maybe they're on the right track. It can't possibly be as bad as the Bay movies. And oh boy, Eric, it's maybe not as bad as those movies, but at least those movies were memorable. I'll start it there.
Yeah, with Michael Bay, those films of the mid 2000s and going into the 2010s, they have a certain distinct stink to them, where they're hypersexualized, they're patriotic and warmongering, the racial stereotypes and offenses of all kind that Michael Bay, those Bay-isms that you're kind of accustomed to in his R-rated action movies in the Bruckheimer canon, sort of making their way into essentially a kid or teen franchise, and the way that, you know, the conversation kind of leaned towards how he was treating cast members on set, and that kind of overly stylized kind of sheen about it was all problematic. But there was a conversation to be had about why those movies don't work, and it's kind of almost fascinating to look at them like you do slasher films as a whole, not individual films, because I feel like the Sam Witwicky trilogy and the Cade Yeager movies, for the most part, the double bill of those films, they mostly all kind of,
duology.
the duology, they blur together basically, and
Yeah.
it's almost hard to kind of dissect like what happens in each one.
Which one had the robot testicles, or which one
Which
had
was,
the,
I think, 2, because like
it was 2, I know.
yeah,
but,
because
like,
2
I'm
is
just-
best known for the robot testicles and the racist twins. And
Yeah.
then 3 is when Megan Fox didn't return because she had the falling out with Michael Bay, and that's when they
one
have
of them
the,
has Merlin in it, and
that is The Last Night, which is the worst film of the franchise, and that's, he's played by Stanley Tucci, playing a different character from Age of Extinction, from the last movie, which is the Katie Yeager ones. So that played by Mark Wahlberg. So there's a lot there where it's like it almost feels like by the end of each one of those movies, you have exhausted brain cells to the point where you're doing actual damage to yourself. And you, I remember with The Last Night, like literally feeling like I wanted to have an out of body experience because it was just so exhausting to get through. With Transformers Rise of the Beasts, it's a different kind of bad, and it's I think actually weirdly more offensive, not because it's doing any of the things that I mentioned that Michael Bay movies
not
do.
legitimately offensive,
No,
but more offensive.
but it's offensive because it's so generic. It's so middle of the road. It's kind of making a streamlined blockbuster entertainment, but it's not doing anything one way or another to really gain your interest. And yes, it is taking from the first Transformers movie in that it's kind of centering it on a relationship between a human and a robot, a Brooklyn man, played by Anthony Ramos in 1994. He plays Noah Diaz, and he kind of befriends Mirage, voiced by an obnoxious Pete Davidson. And it's sort of, you know, their kind of bonding in the way that Sam Witwicky and Bumblebee kind of took on that kind of boy and his transformer relationship over the course of the story. And then they have to save the world from an impending threat. And every movie, as any, I think, summer blockbuster does, the threat kind of looms larger and larger to the point where you have to bring in something like Unicron because he is kind of like the ultimate threat. But ultimately, you're watching this thing and you're thinking, okay, like, yeah, it's going to maybe connect with the audience that grew up in the late 90s with that, you know, CGI series. But the Beasties are basically window dressing in this film, in the same way that the Dinobots were in, I think, Age of Extinction, where you have these characters that are presented in the forefront and even in the title of this movie, but they're never really
a part
of it, with the exception of exposition and Michelle Yeoh voicing Air Razor, and even that you just kind of are almost embarrassed for. You know, someone like that who just won an Oscar and has to deal with delivering lines that are just so stilted and only can be delivered in one manner.
Kind of funny though sometimes.
Oh, definitely. I think it's the same thing with
we
the
said
Fast,
about Fast X,
franchise, because it's funny when it's sincere, but when it's actually trying to be funny, it's almost unbearable to watch, and it's just, it doesn't work. And so when you have, you know, Peter Cullen randomly saying, you know, B, as in referring to Bumblebee, the way that, you know, Dom says little b, or John Cena's character in Fast 10 says little b, it's just an odd choice. And then again, like centering this in 1994, the year that Pulp Fiction won the Palme d'Or,
That was probably happening as this movie was
Yeah,
going on.
or it was just a little bit afterwards, because there are some moments where you get like the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase and stuff like that in the background. But
The very on the nose 1990s
yeah, and the
references.
soundtrack as well a little bit. Although again, a lot of the songs that are used are kind of like you've heard them in other movies as of late, like especially LL Cool J's "Mama Said Knock You Out," where it kind of just feels
Yeah.
like even in Deadpool 2, it's so derivative of the time period.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. I'm on the exact same page as you, where, I think, I don't know. It's hard going back to Bumblebee now because it just feels like I said this in my tweet, like an anomaly of this franchise where you've said it before too, where Bumblebee's almost just ET, right? Like they turned it into, an alien kind of that more singular focus on Lil B or Big B in this um,
Big B.
um, worked, and I thought Haley Steinfeld and Bumblebee's relationship, John Cena as a corny villain, like I thought so much worked in that movie. The time period, I think worked, and I loved seeing Optimus look like his 80s cartoon version of him, and the action in that was easier to follow because the Bay movies just was like metal in a blender. And I feel like even going back to the title of this movie, of just instead of calling it Beast Wars or Beasties or something like that, and actually having this be part of the Transformers franchise, right? Where I think there was some expectations there that just this being a mainline big deal kind of thing, where I guess Bumblebee felt like this offshoot, and then maybe that's why it worked, where this just feels like more of the same, although it's toned down, but then still earnest and funny at moments, unintentionally funny, and then you just get kind of bored throughout the whole thing, where I just wish I felt something where you just kind of, and I said this, I missed the Bayhem because as bad as his movies were, he made them feel important, even though they were always nonsense, and there was so much bad stuff in there. He threw so much money and so many explosions and so much, like that first movie did so well that franchise always made $1 billion. Every movie felt like this big fucking deal, even though what you're watching wasn't great. Where this just, I don't know, it just feels like people compared it to an episode of the Saturday morning cartoon of Transformers, and that is how it feels, but like in an for me, I don't use it as a positive. Like it just feels like throwaway kind of popcorn entertainment that I was not really entertained by. Like it doesn't feel like there's any heart in the movie. I don't buy the relationship with Mirage and Anthony Ramos's character, Noah, and like I just, that never works for me. The last act has a lot of ridiculous over the top action, and yeah, it's cool to see the Maximals, and you hear the catchphrases and you see them transform finally, and like that, as a fan of that cartoon as a kid, is like for a moment like, oh shit, okay, I'm watching this in this big budget live action movie. This is absurd, but like it's kind of fun for a moment, but that's so fleeting. And then every ridiculous choice that it makes, and ridiculous piece of dialogue, and it's just, yes, it's funny in one moment, but then you're just like, what? Maybe we've outgrown this franchise. Like, and I know it's for kids, right? Like I was a kid when I loved Transformers, so another movie we're going to be talking about soon, like I try to put my brain in like, okay, Matt, this might not be for you, so put yourself in the headspace of a 10-year-old kid when you loved Transformers, and would you enjoy this? And they probably are going to. So like that's the thing. But Eric and I are 35-year-old men. We're viewing it from that lens. But I'm like, is it the worst thing in the world? No. Like if you take your 10-year-old kid to go see this, are they going to enjoy themselves? Probably. But I was a dumb 10-year-old kid too at one point and liked a lot of crappy movies. So like
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. Like it's this, for me, it's a difficult movie to like even critique, because I'm like, it's not bad. It's, but you, like you said, it's the most egregious thing is that it's just kind of nothing. Like it it doesn't add anything. It's not super engaging. It's not super entertaining. The action is kind of just, you know, it feels like every other Transformer movie you've seen before, but probably toned down a little bit. Like even the lineup of Transformers, yes, like I love hearing Peter Cullen as Optimus Prime. But like you said, when you call this movie Rise of the Beasts, it's not even really about them. Like they're just the like kind of bookends of the movie, right? They are just to deliver exposition and setup and plot, right? Like it's not like this whole thing revolved around them. Like they are kind of sidelined for a huge chunk of the movie. They introduce the movie and they come back in the last act. And that's kind of disappointing for a movie where they're in the title, right? Like we've seen what is this, number 6 or
7.
7?
Well,
Like
it's 6 in the main line, 7 in
yeah, but
total
7
because it's
total.
the spinoff
But
of
we've
Bumblebee.
seen Optimus and B in every single movie, basically, right? And like even with some of the choices they make here, sure, but then why even have them? Like I would have liked a more singular kind of focus. If this is supposed to be about the Maximals, focus them on the Maximals, right? Like Bumblebee worked because it was a spin-off and you focused on something. Where when you go back to the world ending, the Transformers want to get back to Cybertron, they need to save Earth, they need to work with a human. Like I've seen it 6 times already. And like, is Anthony Ramos any more engaging than Mark Wahlberg or Shia LaBeouf? Sure, he's a better actor probably than, I mean, Wahlberg can be good in some things, but yeah, he's fine. Like everything is fine. Like I find it so hard to be like, yeah, it's not horrible. Like again, but that's more interesting to talk about. I could talk about, the Michael Bay Transformers movies for probably 5 hours because again, there's 6 of them or whatever. There's 5 of them.
Yeah, because he didn't direct so
Yeah,
this one in Bumblebee, right? So
yeah, so he made 5 of them, and I could probably talk about those for 5 hours because there's so much shit in those movies, like literally and figuratively.
yeah.
Where this, I don't know, I just kind of sat there emotionless. Like I agree with you, I didn't really laugh. I think Pete Davidson has overstayed his welcome in everything. I just like everything he pops up in now. I'm like, I know we have that kind of person of the week, which is usually person of the year or a couple years in Hollywood or whatever, and he's that guy right now. But um it just it's exhausting in a different way than the Bay movies, and I don't know, it was just kind of nothing. So if you're listening to this and you have a young kid who likes the Transformers, or if you're like a long time fan, you're gonna go see this anyway, and you'll have varying degrees of enjoyment. Like it's I don't know. I just sat there and at the end of it was like, I will forget about this movie in a week. And when I'm looking back at the Transformers movies, yes, all 5 of Bay's movies might blend together, but I'm going to remember moments from them, good or bad, from those movies, more bad than good. But this, I'll just be like, oh yeah, that Beast Wars movie came out in 2023. I'm like, all right, what happened in that one again? I have no idea. So
Yeah, there's not going to be a super cut of, Shia LaBeouf saying no, 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 no,
yeah,
no 100 times, or, that horrible Romeo and Juliet law thing in one of
oof,
the later ones. Again,
yikes,
again,
yeah,
this is a guilt-free experience. So if you want to take your kids to see it, you don't
yeah.
have to
You're not gonna,
explain to them afterwards how offensive or how inappropriate certain things are, and you should not repeat lines or act
hmm
the way that these human characters behave.
but no one wingsuits in this movie.
No
So
one, no
like
one
again,
wingsuits into Chicago in the third act. There's the globe trotting aspect of this story as well. When they go to Peru, unfortunately, Paddington is not a part of the series, which is
feels kind of
a,
forced if
a
I'm being
bummer.
honest. Yeah,
Yeah, and again, like it's to change the location up, and
the
you're
MacGuffins on MacGuffins on
yeah, well,
MacGuffins.
the phallic looking MacGuffin of this, the transwarp key, is probably the funniest thing about it, unintentionally so, because the way that they talk about it and having to go from one location to another, it just kind of feels like, okay, well, this is the driving force behind this film, and you never really get a sense of satisfaction when it comes to the big battles. I think, like, talking about one of the things that makes the CGI series great and the 2D series from the 80s wonderful is that they were bright colors and so vibrant, where by the time you get to the big showdown in the third act, you're just watching, this basically this bland
A big
beige
field with a bunch of
gray,
like
blob of CGI, sludge, and it's just it's so exhausting in that way. That is similar to the Michael Bay movies when you're watching them, and going back again to Bumblebee, you also had Travis Knight directing the film, who's the head of Leica, Chili T himself, and so he I think had more of a comfort with animation, and that ET through line, even though there's a lot of ET references in this movie, it felt a little bit more honed in with Christina Hodgson's writing the script, where you have about 3 or 4 writers on this, and so the consistency isn't there compared to Bumblebee as kind of a
5
more
writers on this.
5 writers on this, so like more of a singular vision with Bumblebee overall, and something that's a little bit more small scale in terms of its stakes, and I think that also kind of helped it quite a bit. And nothing against Stephen Caple Jr., who's the director on this. I think like he did a fine job with Creed 2, even though again not that memorable in terms of the Creed movies, but still sustainable in what it's doing as a sequel. And here you just kind of feel like almost anybody could have directed this in a way, and you have this the only other human character, the main character, is Dominique Fishback's Elena, who is this intrepid museum intern who knows her stuff and is the person that doesn't get the credit that she deserves, and you feel so bad for her because she's given absolutely nothing to do other than to just kind of lead the main character, Noah, into the next MacGuffin or the next set piece, and to kind of look shocked. And both actors have done good work previously. I mean, obviously Ramos has been a part of the Lin-Manuel Miranda crew with Hamilton and In the Heights, and Fishback has done some really good work in Judas and the Black Messiah, and it's a great paycheck for them. It's bigger roles for them, but it's still very awkward watching them interact with the Transformers, because it just looks for the most part like they're looking off either in the distance or in the side to like see a tennis ball. Yeah, but some people I think are better at it, or at least have more fun with it, where you can tell that they're treating it seriously, which isn't a bad thing, but at the same time it almost comes off just as awkward or artificial as any of the other movies. And so when you're watching that fourth wall of being taken out of the film, and watching these up and coming actors trying their best to kind of make a tennis ball in their frame of reference work. So it's just really it's really disappointing when you kind of have maybe a little bit of hope for something, especially if you do have even the slightest of attachments. And again, the vocal work of a lot of these actors coming in and doing voiceovers for the smaller Transformer roles. Peter Dinklage didn't need to voice the henchman Scourge. Like it does.
But Scourge ends up becoming the main villain. I was just going to bring that up, and because Unicron is kind of just, it's hard when you have that Galactus like planet eating kind of thing, because you do have to sideline that type of character for a long time, or else they're just going to bite Earth like an apple, right? Like, so when you sideline a character, sort of cut you off though,
No, it's
Eric,
all right.
but like it just felt like, okay, so the main villain in this movie is Unicron. Sure, Unicron's not really in the movie, and then you have his henchman as like the main villain. Yes, Dinklage, great actor, great voice, works for it. I like the element of like he's like a trophy hunter, and he takes the symbols off of the Transformers and like kind of welds them onto his body. And even when he transforms, it's like a kind of a dark Optimus Prime, because I think he's also like a transport truck, I believe, or some sort of truck.
He's a Terracon for Unicron.
Yeah, and he has all the logos on the front grille, and I think that's kind of cool from a design standpoint. And I will give these last 2 movies credit that the design of the Transformers, using the 80s and 90s designs, we mentioned the colorful thing. It's still not a colorful movie, but at least like the designs of the Transformers, I think, are much more interesting. They have that more boxy kind of look from the toys and from the animated series, and like that is continued over here. So so I did like elements of Scourge, but then in the end you're just like, okay, he's a henchman and this isn't super interesting.
Yeah, but you have to think to yourself, why, other than a paycheck, why would
Yeah.
you give Peter Dinklage this role? Because you're also auto
I
tuning
didn't
him
even
or
know it was
putting,
him, to be
yeah, putting him
honest. Yeah.
his voice through a filter, the same way that you're putting Coleman Domingo's voice, who does
Yeah.
Unicron, through kind of a filter, and it almost feels like almost anybody could have done those roles. So why specifically, or cast Michelle Yeoh, or like it's not necessary. And then in previous ones you've had people like John Goodman voice a role, and it's like you don't need those actors, that quality of actor, to voice those. You can just get the people that did the original Beast Wars or Transformers movies to come in and do that. I don't think
Just
it's
like you have Peter Cullen, right?
exactly.
Like, yeah.
You don't need to
I mean, I
have.
thought Ron Perlman fit for
Sure.
Optimus Primal, but also I agree with you. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like Ron Perlman, great voice, works as that character. But I agree with you. Like for the Transformers, I don't think you really need to. Like, I understand the Pete Davidson thing. If you have like a main Transformer throughout the whole thing, that's kind of I know Mirage isn't necessarily a new like original character or anything, but I understand that, as much as I don't like Pete Davidson or his performance or anything. But I do understand some of that. But then you have this weird mix, because you have people like John DiMaggio in there, and then you have Peter Cullen, and you have people who are voice actors, right? But then you randomly have Michelle Yeoh and people like that, where it just feels like this weird mix of things where most people aren't even going to know it's those actors, right? So like,
Yeah.
why not use the people who have done these voices before in the animated series? And I think that's always kind of a cool way to bridge that. They've done these characters for so long, it kind of honors them doing that work and working on those shows and stuff like that. And I think if anything, you're probably going to get better voice performances because they are voice actors, right? Like that's what a lot of people say in animated movies. You hire celebrities sometimes, or not celebrities, but actors, like big named actors and stuff like that. And you're really only doing them so you can slap their name on a poster, right? Like, it's not necessarily like,
But you're not even doing that with these
yeah.
movies. Like, you're not.
Actually, yeah, that's true. There's so many people that you really only have like the human actors on the poster.
And Optimus
And then,
Prime, because people
yeah.
are coming for the characters specifically. Kids want to see Optimus Prime or Bumblebee, so you're going to put Optimus Prime and Bumblebee, who they don't care who voices those characters. They just want to
That's true.
see the
Oh,
Autobots themselves.
and going back with that, excuse me, would that have helped this movie if we had the animated series actors? I don't know, maybe a little burst of nostalgia for me and you hearing those voices again or something like that. But I think it's mostly just some of the choices. Like, I know the last act, I again, shout out to Danny Rojas from Ted Lasso as well, because right when he pops in, it's Cristo Fernandez as Wheeljack. And I'm like, is that Danny Roja? I'm like, oh yeah, it is. It's very clearly Danny Roja from Ted Lasso. Stuff like that. So I mean, I don't know. And then the last act, there's some choices that I don't want to see in a Transformers movie. Like, it's just dancing around stuff. But like, yes, there's some, it's bombastic, it's big, just like the Bay movies were, but maybe is easier to follow. But it still ends up, like you said earlier, Eric, just being this kind of open field. A lot of the Maximals aren't very colorful. They're gray or black, or you have 15 Scorponok's running around and stuff like that. So it just becomes kind of nonsense. But then you have some choices with the human characters and things like that, where I'm just like, ooh, now I'm starting to actively not like this. Where
Yeah.
before I was just kind of whatever. But then there's certain choices there, which I've gone back and I was like, have they done that before? And I did go back and I'm like, okay, that is sort of a thing in this franchise, but like, I'm just like, it looked goofy, and I did not like it. I'm like, I'm not here for that. I'm here for the robot cars to transform. But I don't know.
Yes, and without saying that, it's also very funny to see that one of the writers actually also worked on something that kind of, one of the designs is very reminiscent of what is presented in the third act here, and I don't even want to say the name of the movie per se, but
Okay.
it does feel kind of similar to that as well, where the tech is kind of meeting something that is a hybrid kind of force. um yeah, that third act, and I think even moving beyond this movie and what this film is trying to set up feels as though it is grasping at straws when it comes to competing with modern blockbusters. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the Transformers films have for the most part felt irrelevant for the last decade or so, you know, and
Yeah.
so, you know, you see this movie and kind of what it's doing with its world building. You feel as if, okay, well, it's competing with the shape of you know, the modern studio system, and what people want in terms of their spectacle and their world building. And with that in mind, you know, you watch this movie and you get to the end and you think to yourself, okay, I don't really know if any of that was necessary, and it just kind of feels like, you know, a way to kind of continue on this series, where if this was just kind of, again, another more streamlined or singular experience, I think this kind of would have been the end of it, really, because how much more
Because you're
room
getting
do you
close.
yeah, how
That's what I was just gonna say, right? Like this movie's in '94. The first Transformers film is
7.
2007,
Yeah.
right? So you're pretty close. I guess you could have another movie take place in the early 2000s, or like, you know, at the I guess 6 years later, maybe you do it in the year 2000 or something like that, because that feels like it's a good middle ground between, like, you really can only squeeze in one more movie unless you're resetting the timeline, and you like do the X-Men thing where every decade, because that's basically what they're sort of doing, right? They're
Yeah.
doing the X-Men thing where it's like, okay, first movie's 80s, next movie's 90s, then you're gonna have one either what, 2004 or in the early 2000s, but then you're getting so close to the original movies that, I don't know, to do the Rogue One thing where it leads directly into the first Transformers movie. So you really are running out of runway here.
Not like
So
Fast and Furious.
yeah, no infinite runway, but like, so yeah, I'm with you. And the setup is ridiculous, and like it feels super forced. And I agree with you that like it's just where this movie leaves you. Um, I It feels like a cheap pop, but I don't know who the pop is
Is
for. I
4?
guess it's like, because I did say like this is a kids movie, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then you go, do kids care about that? And we're dancing around a lot of stuff because we're not allowed to spoil anything. But if you've seen the movie, you know what we're talking about. And I struggle to go, is anyone asking for this? Like, I think we're at a point, and I'm curious of how this movie does. Is like, I think we're okay to like be like, you know what? It had a good run. It made a ton of money. We had one good movie. Um,
Out of 7.
I'll argue the first one, maybe not a good movie, is still. I remember really enjoying that movie in 2007. Much different time.
Do you think
I
also because it
feel
was
like
the
that.
first live
Yes,
action one as well, and that
yes,
maybe was why?
absolutely. All plays into it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you do have some, you know, rose-colored glasses for that movie. I think. Going back and watching it now in a lens today, is it objectively a good movie? No, but like at that time, it felt important. It felt big. It felt like, holy shit, like we're getting a live action Transformers movie. This is crazy. The scale of everything. That's something we didn't bring up either. It's just like the scale of those Michael Bay movies just felt big. Where I'm just going, I think it's time to like maybe sunset, you know, the Transformers for a while, but it doesn't seem like Hasbro wants to do that. So if they keep making money, they'll keep making these movies. So I don't know. Again, if you're 10 years old, are you going to like this movie? Probably. That's the most positive thing I can say. So if you're an adult, or even if you have an affinity for the original Transformers cartoon or Beast Wars. Like I think you're going to be curious and you're going to see the movie either way. I think you'll kind of feel somewhere in the middle where you'll either feel nothing or you'll be like, it was okay. Anything from I didn't like it to I never will think about it again to like it was okay, I think is all valid in this situation. So I think I'm going to give the movie a 2 just because it did not work for me. It was just kind of underwhelming and nothing. So that's where I land, but I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah, I'm also going to give it a 2, and I think it's again, it comes down to, I understand people giving it a pass in the sense of it's a little bit less aggressive or confrontational in its style and aesthetic than Michael Bay's movie, or Michael Bay's films, but at the same time, there's not a lot here going on that you could see in any other modern blockbuster, really. And like it's a dime a dozen when you consider, like, we have Star Wars, we have Marvel, we have all these other franchises.
We just had Spider-Verse, which
which I think has ruined blockbusters going on, moving on for the rest of the summer and maybe for years to come, because it is so well thought out and written and structured, where you have something like this. I think ultimately what this movie, the goal here is just to have fun and
for a couple hours.
And really, when you're watching this thing, this is one of the shorter, if not the shortest, of the live action movies, and it still feels close to 3 hours just because there's not a lot going on, and it's paced in a kind of glacial kind of sense where you spend a lot of time with Anthony Ramos in that first act. We didn't even talk about his kid brother who's sick with an illness that is nondescript, and that's his whole motivational factor to kind of, join his buddy to steal cars, and that's kind of where his friendship with Mirage lands. Like, it just, all of that feels so unbelievably tacked on, and
I think that's why we didn't even talk about it, right?
No, I know. And again, like, it's like, okay, well, you got to give these actors something to do. The same thing with Dominique Fishback having, the sense of, like, she comes from a background where her father was a cabbie, and she, has learned from him that, you always need to look and listen and really be open to the world around you. And the emotions that the actors are delivering are earnest, and they're doing the best they can, but there's just not really much there to work with, unfortunately. And so when you're just sitting there watching it, you're there's nothing really that ever engaged. Again, I'm talking from my perspective, because again, there are people that I think do like it, but when you're watching that relationship between Noah and Mirage, it just falls flat. The battle sequences all kind of feel the same. You could cut a scene from this movie, battle sequence wise, that maybe doesn't have the beasties in it, and put it up against any of the other ones that you've seen in any of the other movies, and say, oh, is this from Rise of the Beast, or is this from one of the other ones? And it would be pretty hard to tell, for the most part, I think. Even in the design, like, I think, again, because it's such, everything is, the color palette is all the same, and it's just like that overly saturated kind of gray look, that you almost want those Bayisms again to come back a little bit, not the offensive stuff, but like almost the cheesy stuff, where you almost need a Linkin Park or Imagine Dragons song to be scored in a scene, because it's almost
someone
like
we need to wingsuit in, and Chicago's on fire, and like,
because that is a good, even though, again, I don't think the movie works overall, but that sequence in the third film in the Sam Witwicky trilogy is a really well directed action sequence. And whether Bay himself did a lot of work or had the second unit kind of shoot that is a creative or interesting standout moment. And another thing we didn't really talk about as well is that I think you do need, even though it'd be a waste of someone's time, you do need a couple maybe character actors, because Bay has this thing where he always brings Coen Brothers actors into a lot of these movies, but also his other films as well. And just having these two younger actors, it's almost, it feels like you need somebody to kind of be a guide or to kind of kick things off, even though, again, Anthony Hopkins gave one of his worst performances in The Last Night. Stanley Tucci was terrible. Francis McDormand, John Malkovich, all these people that are.
It's a rite of passage if you're a great character actor to go do a horrible performance
and collect that check, man.
Yeah.
There
So
is
I don't
one
know.
character actor in this that I do really like, but again, like it's hard to talk about because of just like the spoiler stuff. But
Yeah.
he's not really as well known as the people I just mentioned. So,
Yeah.
but it's good to see him pop up whenever he does. So yeah,
Yeah, but maybe not in this case.
no,
Anyways,
no, no.
thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. Eric and I will be back kind of in full force in the next little while. We've been kind of soft launching back into recording and doing reviews and stuff like that. But we should have a review soon for Elemental, for God, what the hell have
Asteroid
we watched?
City,
Asteroid City, Indiana
The
Jones,
Flash.
The Flash, a bunch of things that we'll be seeing or have seen in the last little while. So you should be getting more and more of this in the next couple weeks. I'm glad to be back. Appreciate everyone for your patience and other things. So, and everyone who reached out after that last episode, I appreciate you as well. I know I opened up a little bit at the end of that episode of what was going on, and we'll still get back to the main show, the Untitled Movie Podcast, soon. We're just trying to, again, soft launch, do a couple reviews, and then we'll pick up the pace a little bit and kind of do some more stuff. Eric and I are going to a Dragon Ball concert tonight, so that should be fun.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that and different things like that. So until next time, you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck, and make sure to let him come, everyone.
And I'm Eric Marchand. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211. We also have a Letterboxd account, which is Untitled. Is it _ movies? I can never remember.
Untitled
these.
_ movies. I know we're getting.
It's been a while. We're getting back into the groove.
The Letterboxd will be back up and updated and all that kind of stuff. So we'll be back at everything in the next little while, and we'll get these outros and intros back on track because we're a little rusty. Just like this franchise. Bye,
yes.
everyone.